we want to display some user information within our dropdown in our user panel component, in particular the username, the user that's currently signed in. And to do that, one approach would be to bring in Redux, in particular to use the connect function. So we could grab connect from React Redux, and at the bottom, at our export, can wrap the user panel component with it. Can also map state to props by creating the map state to props function, where we take in the global state and return an object with the properties that we want from it. So for example, we could grab the current user property when we set our user from the user property. So we could create a prop on our props object of current user with the value of state.user.currentUser, and optionally we could destructure the state parameter, so that we could just change the path to user.currentUser, but we'll leave it at state. And now that we're mapping this property to our props, we could log it within render, referencing it with this.props.currentUser. And when our component loads, our user panel loads, and we'll refresh the page, you can see we have all of the user data from our global state. So this is one approach to passing state down from our global state to an individual component such as user panel. But to get the username value within our dropdown, we can create a state object where we have this user property, and instead of logging the value within render to update the state object, we can't do it from the render function. We need to create a lifecycle method such as component.didMount, and then when we get that user data, we can set the state, and in particular this user property that we created, we can set it to this.props.currentUser, and then using the user property in state, we want to get the username. We can get that from this.state.user.displayName. We can save that, and if we reload, you can see we're getting an error. The error is we can't read the property displayName of null. So it looks like we're trying to get a property off of the user object before it is updated. To change that, we can just set a conditional where we're checking to see that we first have a value for our user property, our user object, and then include the displayName property off of that. So that works. But this is a bit tedious to always set up a conditional for every value that we want off of the state object, or a property off of the state object. So another approach that we could take is to use a lifecycle method like component will receive props, where we take in the props that we're getting and set the state according to that. We could set the user value to nextprops.currentUser. So this will also work, but to do this in every component in order to get the values from our global state, again, requires a lot of code. So we're going to take an alternate approach where we're just going to directly set that user value and state to this.props.currentUser and pass down the current user data a bit differently. We're going to go to app.js, and this is where we're going to use the connect function to map state to props. We're going to import connect from React Redux. So we're going to make sure that we're getting all the values from state within one component, our app component. So we'll add connect to the bottom, we'll add map state to props, and here we'll just have one map state to props function that will give us an object with all of the values that we need from our state, and then just pass down the values that we need via props. So we'll first grab current user from state.user.currentUser, and we'll add current user as a property first to our side panel, which is where our user panel component lives. So we'll pass down current user, the prop of current user, and we'll destructure the props in our props object for app, like so. We'll pass current user to the current user prop that we created for side panel. Then within side panel we'll have this current user prop. Within render, we can pluck off that current user prop from this.props, reference that as current user once again, and pass that down to the user panel. So now we're receiving the value for our current user directly within state via props. And now instead of setting up a conditional or using the connect function here, you can just say this.state.user.displayName, to get the username of our currently signed in user, and we can change the trigger in our dropdown to this.state.user.displayName as well. So we'll save all those files. If we head back to our app, we can see immediately we have the name of the user that's currently authenticated in both places in our dropdown. So passing the props, passing the global state down via props instead of using the connect function, only using the connect function in one place within our app component will provide a very convenient way to pass state down to all of the components that will need to access information such as the user data. If we refresh again, we can see that our username is still there.